unaware she inherited 10 billion. After her hidden trillionaire mom died, husband abandons his wife pregnant with twins to marry his wealthy boss. What happened at the will reading later left him shaking. He didn't leave her quietly. He didn't even leave her like a husband. He left her like a man trying to prove a point right there at a family and company gathering with guests watching and phones already raised, while his pregnant wife stood near the doorway still holding her medical bag. Derek Combs took the microphone meant for a toast, looked past Lillian like she wasn't even human, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "I'm filing for divorce. Effective immediately. She's a liability." The room tilted into silence. Someone gasped. Someone else started recording. No one stopped him. At the edge of the crowd, Lillian Foster, 29, 8 months pregnant, with twins, kept one hand pressed over her stomach like she could shield 2 tiny lives from the humiliation crashing down on her. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes betrayed the shock. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry, nothing that hinted at anything powerful. To them, she was just Derek's soft wife, the woman who didn't understand pressure, the one they whispered was a burden. And standing beside Derek was Marissa Conway, his wealthy boss, the woman he'd soon quietly marry. Perfect hair, perfect smile, hand resting on his back like she'd already moved into Lillian's place. Nearby, Derek's mother watched with approval, as if this public destruction was overdue. What none of them understood, what even Lillian didn't understand, was what her mother's death had already set in motion days earlier, a legal machine moving quietly in the background. A will, a trust, a sealed letter meant for Lillian, a number so huge it didn't sound real. In private finance circles, people had once joked that Josephine was the $1 trillion ghost because the investment structures she quietly controlled moved money measured in trillions. Even though her personal estate, carefully ring-fenced, sat at only $10 billion. But the letter that should have told Lillian everything never reached her hands, because someone inside that house had intercepted it. And, unknown to them, someone outside that house, an investigator Josephine had arranged in advance, was already watching, camera ready, from a dark sedan across the street. So while Derek was busy calling her dead weight and turning her pain into a public show, a different truth was racing toward them, one that would end in a silent room full of lawyers, a will reading, and a sentence that would make Derek's hands start to shake. This isn't just a story about a husband choosing a wealthy boss over his pregnant wife. It's about what happens when a man throws away a woman he never truly understood, right before the world finds out who she really is. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like standing in that crowd while Lillian is erased. When you click that button, you stand with every woman who was mocked, abandoned, and still found a way to rise. Please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The call hit like a punch to the chest. Lillian Foster, 29, 8 months pregnant with twins, froze with her hand on a tiny onesie. The fabric stretched between her fingers like it might tear if she breathed wrong. The voice on the phone was polite, trained, too calm for what it was saying. "Miss Foster, I'm so sorry. This is Dr. Shu from Street Bridget's. Your mother, Josephine Conley. She passed away early this morning." For a second, the room didn't feel real. The walls looked too steady. The air looked too normal. Lillian's stomach tightened, twins shifting, as if they felt her shock before she could name it. She tried to stand, but her knees didn't trust her. She lowered herself to the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the open drawer of baby clothes, as if folding and sorting could keep life from changing. Josephine was gone. Not sick. Not getting better slowly. Gone. Lillian pressed the phone to her ear, said thank you, because people said thank you on the phone, even when their world had just cracked. The line went quiet, and she sat there staring at her own reflection in the dark screen. She thought of calling her husband right away. Of course she did. That's what wives did, wasn't it? They reached for the person they trusted most. So she went to find Derek Combs. Derek was 33, tall, sharp-featured, always dressed like he was being watched. He worked under a powerful executive, his boss, Marissa Conway, a wealthy woman with a reputation for turning people into stepping stones. Derek wanted her approval the way some men wanted oxygen. When Lillian walked into the living room, Derek was already halfway inside his phone, thumb moving fast, face tight with focus. He didn't notice her tears at first. "My mom," she said. The words came out small. My mom passed away. Derek blinked once, like he'd heard a noise he didn't understand. Then he exhaled, slow and impatient, not openly cruel, not yet. But the impatience was there, like a warning sign. Lillian, now, he said, eyes dropping back to the screen. I have a lot going on. The quarter review is next week. Marissa needs these numbers. A lot going on. That's what he called his life these days. She waited for the hug, the hand on her shoulder, the simple, human thing. He gave her none of it. Are you sure? He asked, not in concern, more like he wanted the news to be incorrect so it wouldn't interrupt his day. Lillian nodded. She could feel the twins shifting again, her body reacting to stress with a dull ache that spread across her lower back. Derek didn't see it, or he saw it and chose not to. Okay, he said quickly. We'll deal with it. Call whoever you need to call. I can't miss this call with Marissa. Deal with it. That phrase had become his favorite tool. Like her grief was a package he didn't want to touch. Lillian swallowed, because she didn't want to beg for softness. She had learned long ago that begging only made proud people colder. So she nodded like she was fine, because she was good at that. Lillian hadn't grown up dreaming of money. She hadn't grown up even knowing what real money looked like. Josephine Conley raised her in modest rentals, with second-hand furniture that was always clean, and books that were always newer than their clothes. Josephine never wore flashy jewelry. Never talked about success like other parents did. She talked about choices, about safety, about privacy. When Lillian was a teenager, she once asked why they moved houses so often and why her mother never used the same bank twice. Josephine had paused while stirring a pot on the stove, eyes distant like she was listening to a memory. People love you for what they think you need, Josephine said, voice soft but firm. And they resent you for what they think you have. Lillian didn't understand then. She only understood that her mother kept locked drawers and private mail and a calm face that never fully opened. Sometimes, late at night, Josephine would sit at the table with stacks of paper, legal-looking forms, crisp envelopes, signatures. When Lillian walked in, Josephine would slide the papers under a cookbook like it was the most normal thing in the world. Just grown-up stuff, she'd say. Once, Lillian caught a glimpse of a name on a document, Foster Global Trust, and asked if it belonged to family. Josephine smiled like she was hiding a secret inside her teeth. A long story, she said. One you don't need to carry yet. That was Josephine's way. She believed freedom was quiet and safety was silence. What Lillian never knew, couldn't have known, was that Josephine's grown-up stuff wasn't small. Behind Josephine's plain life was a web of private trusts, silent partnerships, and holdings hidden behind legal walls so strong most people didn't even know they existed. Josephine didn't run around calling herself a trillionaire. But the funds and portfolios she had influence over through Foster Global Trust and other vehicles controlled money measured in trillions. People in certain boardrooms called her the trillion-dollar ghost. Her personal estate, though, had been deliberately capped and structured. $10 billion, locked behind conditions and protections. Josephine didn't want a daughter who expected power. She wanted a daughter who deserved it, so she kept Lillian unaware on purpose. And Lillian, trusting her mother, never pushed. She married Derek because he seemed hungry for life, and she believed hunger meant ambition, not danger. She supported his dreams. She made herself smaller when his ego needed space. She told herself love was patience, love was compromise, love was staying. Now she sat on the edge of her bed with Josephine gone, realizing her mother had been her only true protection, whether she understood it or not. Lillian went back to the nursery corner, no fancy theme, no expensive decor, just clean shelves and neatly stacked diapers. She picked up the tiny onesie again and folded it with steady hands that didn't match the shaking inside her chest. She planned which drawer would hold which twin, because if she stopped moving, she might fall apart. Her body ached in that deep, private way pregnancy creates. Every breath felt like work. She didn't complain. She never did. Derek once joked to his friends that she was low maintenance, and they laughed like it was a compliment. He never understood that Lillian had simply learned how to carry weight without asking for applause. She believed marriage was built quietly. She believed loyalty was a daily choice. She believed love didn't need witnesses. Derek moved through the house like a man already gone, checking his phone, adjusting his watch, glancing at his reflection in the window like he was practicing being important. Lillian watched him and felt a strange distance growing, like the space between two people who used to share one life. She mentioned her mother again later, voice softer. I should go through her things, she said. I don't even know where she kept her papers. Derek gave a short sigh. You and your small-town nostalgia, he muttered, half smiling like her grief was a habit that annoyed him. Just do what you have to do. I have a company event coming up. It's important. Marissa's expecting results. An event. Important. Lillian didn't ask who would be there. She didn't ask why his phone never left his hand. She didn't ask why his patience kept shrinking. Because she wanted peace. Because she thought peace could save love. On a shelf in Lillian's bedroom sat a small, outdated phone, never charged properly, never thrown away. It had been Josephine's. Years ago, Josephine had pressed it into her hand. Keep this charged, just in case, she'd said. If there's ever something important about me that you need to know, they'll call this number. Lillian had meant to plug it in. Life got busy. She upgraded her own phone. The old one became a sentimental object instead of the emergency line Josephine wanted it to be. Once, Lillian tried to give it to Derek to recycle. He laughed. Why keep junk? Lillian kept it anyway. She didn't know why. She only knew it felt wrong to let it go. That night, Lillian finally fell asleep with one hand resting over her stomach, as if she could shield the twins from the world simply by touching them. Derek lay beside her, awake. His phone lit up. A message appeared from Marissa Conway, his wealthy boss, the woman whose approval he chased like a lifeline. It read, "We need to talk about your wife." Derek's face tightened. His thumb hovered over the screen. And somewhere, in the quiet machinery of Josephine's hidden life, the first sealed letter from her estate had already been sent out, headed toward the marital address Lillian still thought was safe. The first thing Lillian noticed was Derek's grip, not on her hand, on his phone. He held it like a secret, thumb hovering, eyes darting down whenever it buzzed. And when Lillian asked, softly, if he was okay, Derek's smile came too quickly, too clean. He said he was fine, but his voice carried that thin edge that meant don't ask again, because something had shifted after that message last night. We need to talk about your wife. Lillian didn't know the name attached to it. She didn't know the tone of power behind it. She only knew Derek had gone quiet in a way that felt planned. That evening, he dressed like a man walking into a new life. This is important, he told her while adjusting his jacket in the mirror. It's a company fundraiser and networking night. Appearances matter. Just don't embarrass me, okay? Don't embarrass him. Lillian's face stayed calm, but inside something pressed against her ribs. She was pregnant with twins, carrying 2 heartbeats and still being spoken to like a risk. But she nodded anyway, because her whole life had trained her to keep peace even when it cost her dignity. She chose a simple dress, clean, soft, comfortable. No glitter, no loudness. She wasn't trying to compete. She wasn't trying to be seen. She only wanted to stand beside her husband and feel like they were still a team. But the moment they walked in, Lillian understood. This room was not built for teams. It was built for winners. People wore confidence like perfume. Laughter was practiced. Smiles were weapons. Cameras were everywhere, small ones, phone ones, hidden ones angled the way they always angled, toward status. And right there, in the center of it, was Marissa Conway. Marissa Conway was 38, Derek's boss, and the kind of wealthy executive who didn't need to brag because the room already bragged for her. She had the calm posture of someone who'd never been told no in a way that mattered. Her role wasn't just boss. She controlled Derek's career path, his promotions, his reputation, his hunger. And Derek, starving for validation, treated her approval like it was proof he was finally becoming someone. Marissa never rushed. She didn't need to. She stood exactly where cameras naturally angled toward her, champagne glass untouched, face composed. Power didn't shout from her, it settled, heavy and quiet, as if it owned the air. When Derek arrived with Lillian, Marissa's eyes flicked to Lillian the way people check labels. First, the dress simple, clean, no designer logo begging to be admired. Then Lillian's body pregnant, heavy with twins, moving slower. Marissa's smile didn't widen. It sharpened. Marissa greeted Derek first. "Derek," she said warmly, professionally, like a woman offering him a future. Her hand touched his arm, just a half second too long. Derek straightened as if her fingers had plugged him into electricity. Then Marissa turned to Lillian. Her eyes traveled over Lillian's face with a pleasant, assessing look, like Lillian was a resume someone had already decided not to read. "So this is her," Marissa said. Not a question, not curiosity, a conclusion. Lillian offered her hand because that was what decent people did. Marissa looked at the hand and let a beat of silence pass, just long enough for the message to land. Then Marissa's gaze slipped to the chair beside Derek, Lillian's chair. And Marissa sat there. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was surgical. For a fraction of a second, Derek hesitated. Lillian saw it, the twitch of uncertainty, the flicker of should I, before ambition crushed it. Derek let it happen. He didn't offer Lillian his seat. He didn't say, "That's my wife's place." He simply turned toward Marissa, smiling like he'd been chosen. Lillian stood. A few people noticed. A few people pretended not to. Someone whispered to someone else. Phones angled slightly upward, screens glowing, ready to capture humiliation like entertainment. Lillian felt heat rise into her face, but she kept her posture steady. She could do steady. She had done steady her whole life. Marissa leaned toward Derek and said something low, something that made him laugh. Lillian didn't hear the words, but she heard the meaning. "You don't belong where power sits." Conversations moved like rivers around Lillian. People spoke over her, around her, through her, like she was glass. When she tried to add a small comment, something polite, safe, Derek cut her off with a tight smile. "You wouldn't understand this part," he said, voice carrying just enough to sting. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of humiliation that made people question if they were imagining it. Marissa watched, enjoyed. Her eyes held Lillian the way hunters hold prey. Calm, patient, certain. Later, as executives discussed budgets and streamlining, Marissa casually dropped words like audits and cash flow with the ease of a woman who knew how to make numbers sound like morality. "Sometimes," Marissa said, "liabilities disguise themselves as loyalty." Her eyes landed on Lillian's stomach when she said it. Lillian's hand instinctively pressed to her belly, protective. Two small kicks answered, like the twins were reminding her she wasn't alone. Derek didn't notice. Or he noticed and didn't care. Dinner was announced. People flowed toward tables with assigned seats. Lillian assumed she'd be guided to sit beside her husband. But a young assistant approached with a polite smile that wasn't really polite. "Ma'am," she said softly, "could you stand here for a moment? We're adjusting seating for senior staff and partners. Stand here, not asked positioned." Lillian looked toward Derek. Surely he would speak up now. Surely he would say, "That's my wife." Derek didn't even turn. Marissa did. Marissa's gaze said everything Derek wouldn't. "See? Even he knows where you belong." Lillian stood with the assistants while plates were placed for everyone else. She watched laughter spill across tables, watched Derek lean toward Marissa, watched the space beside him remain empty like a statement. No one defended her. Silence became complicity. Later, Marissa raised her glass. The room quieted. Phones lifted slightly. Attention gathered around her like gravity. "To clarity," Marissa said, "to efficiency, and to the courage to let go of what no longer serves growth." People murmured approval. Smiles. Clinks of glass. Marissa's eyes never left Lillian. Derek clapped first. Lillian didn't. Her fingers curled at her side, steady on the outside, trembling underneath. It wasn't just jealousy she felt. It was recognition. Recognition of something her mother once warned her about, how certain people could look at you and decide you were disposable. As the night ended, Derek walked ahead of Lillian, already absorbed in conversation, already moving like she wasn't attached to him. Marissa drifted close, passing Lillian with the scent of expensive confidence. She brushed by as if it was an accident, then murmured almost kindly, almost like advice, "Motherhood makes women smaller. You'll see." Lillian's breath caught. Not fear, recognition. Because in that moment she understood. Marissa wasn't just flirting with Derek. Marissa was studying Lillian, planning around her. And Derek, her husband, was letting it happen. When they got home, Derek didn't ask if Lillian was okay. He went straight to his phone. Lillian stood in the doorway, watching him type with the urgency of a man protecting something precious. Then she saw the screen light up again. Marissa's name. Another message. Short, cold. A command, not a conversation. Tomorrow, I'll come by the house. We'll handle this properly. Derek's jaw tightened, and for the first time, he looked at Lillian not like a wife, but like a problem he had to solve. And somewhere deep in Lillian's memory, her mother's voice rose like a warning she had ignored for too long. People resent you for what they think you have. Lillian didn't know it yet, but the next day would not be about work. It would be about erasing her. And as she turned off the bedroom light, she noticed Derek had locked his phone with a new password, like he was preparing for a war she didn't even know had begun. The papers were already waiting for her, spread across the kitchen table like a verdict. Lillian stepped in and stopped so hard her breath caught. For one sharp second, her mind refused to name what she was seeing. Printed statements, highlighted lines, a folder stamped with the company logo, and Marissa Conway standing in her home like she owned the walls. Marissa, 38. Derek's wealthy boss leaned against the counter with calm eyes and perfect posture, as if she had simply walked into the wrong house and decided to stay. She held a slim tablet at her side, expression smooth, mouth relaxed, no guilt, no apology, just control. And next to the papers sat Karen Mullen, Derek's mother, early 60s, sharp-faced, dressed like she was attending a courtroom. Karen wasn't a visitor in this marriage. She was a judge who believed she had the right to sentence people. Derek paced behind them, phone in hand, jaw tight. He didn't look at Lillian the way a husband looks at a wife. He looked at her like she was a problem that had finally become official. Lillian's twins shifted, a slow roll inside her stomach. Her body knew something was wrong before her mind could catch up. "What is this?" she asked, voice thin but steady. No one answered her directly, because the accusations didn't arrive as questions. They arrived as conclusions. Karen tapped a page with one fingernail, lips pressed in a kind of moral satisfaction. "She's been siphoning money," Karen said, like she was reading out loud from a script she had rehearsed. "Small amounts from the joint account, enough to hide, enough to make Derek look irresponsible at work." Lillian stared at the page. Her name was printed there, her address, numbers that looked like they belonged to her life. But the account number didn't. The pattern didn't. The transfer descriptions didn't sound like anything she'd done. Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, to ask Derek to look closely, to use his own eyes for once. But Derek's gaze slid past her and landed on Marissa, like her approval mattered more than truth. "You said HR flagged this," Derek said to Marissa, voice low and urgent. Marissa gave a small nod, almost bored. "I said finance flagged irregular personal transfers that create exposure," she corrected smoothly. "I brought you the internal template so you'd understand the seriousness. If this escalates, HR will have to get involved." She said it like it was official, like she was doing them a favor by handling it informally at their kitchen table. Lillian's skin went cold. Marissa wasn't just here as a woman. She was here wrapped in the language of a system, spreadsheets, logos, internal review, exposure. And in Derek's mind, that meant she had the right to define reality. Lillian took a careful step forward. "This isn't..." Karen cut her off without even looking at her. "Stop. Don't embarrass yourself." "Embarrass yourself?" Lillian blinked, stunned by how quickly the room had turned into a place where her voice didn't count. Derek finally turned to her, eyes sharp with something worse than anger, disgust, as if believing she could defend herself was offensive. "I carried you," he said. "You were nothing before me. You don't even understand how accounts work, and now look." The words landed like a slap even though his hand didn't move. Lillian felt her face heat, then go numb. Nothing before him? She wanted to laugh because she had been a whole person before she ever met Derek, but she didn't laugh. She couldn't. Her throat was full. Marissa watched, arms folded now, expression composed. She looked almost satisfied, as if this was the moment she had been arranging since the fundraiser, quietly, carefully, like a chess player moving pieces into place. Lillian reached toward the papers, needing to hold them, to prove to herself she wasn't imagining the wrongness. Derek knocked the stack from the table with a sharp sweep of his hand. Pages fluttered to the floor like wounded birds. "Don't touch," he snapped. "You'll contaminate them. We need them as evidence." Contaminate, like she was dirty, like she was the crime. Lillian's hands froze in the air. She felt every eye on her, Karen's cold stare, Marissa's calm gaze, Derek's anger. Even the kitchen itself felt like it had taken sides. Karen stood and moved closer, voice lowering into something that pretended to be concern. Pregnancy makes women unstable, she said, as if she was warning Derek about a dangerous animal. We warned him. We. Lillian's heart thumped hard. We warned him. As if this had been discussed. As if this moment had been planned between them, somewhere behind her back, while she was folding baby clothes and believing in marriage. Marissa nodded one small, silent agreement. Lillian slowly crouched to pick up the fallen pages. Her back protested, twins pressing low, but she forced herself to move carefully. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of panic. As she gathered the papers, her eyes caught something small. A formatting error, a tiny detail most people wouldn't notice. The spacing of the header, the way the audit summary aligned with the margins. Lillian had seen that exact template before on Derek's laptop when he worked late on the department documents he left open. That template came from Marissa's department, not from a neutral HR system. Lillian didn't say it out loud. Not yet. The air wasn't safe for truth right now. Truth would be shouted down. So she memorized it. The way the font sat, the way the highlight color looked, the way the internal review language was written. If she survived this moment, she would need every detail. Derek's voice rose again. I trusted you, he said, too loud, too performative. He wanted this to be a scene where he looked righteous. And this is what you do? While I'm working? While I'm trying to build a future? Lillian looked up at him from the floor, papers in her hands. A future? He said it like she wasn't carrying it inside her body. Marissa stepped closer, heels quiet on the tile, and spoke in a voice designed to sound reasonable. Derek, she said gently, like she was calming a child. We'll do this properly. Documentation, process, boundaries. You can't have someone creating this kind of instability at home. Boundaries. Lillian's stomach tightened. The twins kicked harder now, restless. She breathed through it, refusing to show pain. Karen's mouth curled. She's a burden, she said, not caring anymore. Always has been. Derek didn't argue. That was the loudest part. Lillian stood slowly, one hand braced on the table. Her eyes moved from Karen to Marissa to Derek. She wanted to ask, when did you decide I was the enemy? But she already knew the answer. They had decided the moment she became vulnerable. That night, after the house finally went quiet, Lillian sat alone with her phone in her hands. Derek had gone into the bedroom without speaking to her, like he had already filed her under resolved. Lillian tried to check the joint account just to breathe, just to reassure herself that she could still buy diapers, still buy medicine, still protect the twins if Derek kept escalating. The screen loaded. Then one line appeared. Account closed by authorized user. Her chest went hollow. Before she could move, her phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. One message, no name. It's over. Don't make this harder. The wording was Derek's. The lack of name was deliberate. Lillian stared at the words until they blurred. And somewhere behind the silence of the house, she heard Derek's voice in the hallway, low and urgent, as if speaking to someone who mattered more than she did. Tomorrow it sounded like they planned to make this official in front of people. The microphone squealed, sharp and ugly, and the whole room flinched. Lillian Foster froze mid-step, her breath catching like she'd been pushed underwater. Her heart slammed once, hard, as Derek Combs lifted the mic that was supposed to be used for a toast. The crowd went quiet the way crowds do when they sense blood in the water, phones already half raised, eyes bright with the thrill of witnessing someone else's life collapse. They called it a celebration dinner, part family gathering, part work event. Derek's colleagues, Marissa's circle, a few relatives. Enough people to make humiliation feel official. Derek stood tall, shoulders squared, wearing the face of a man who believed he was finally in control. He didn't glance at Lillian first. He looked straight ahead, like she wasn't even part of the conversation. I'm filing for divorce, he said, effective immediately. A pause, gasps, a few nervous laughs that died quickly when no one joined in. Lillian's stomach tightened, twins shifting low, reacting to the shock moving through her body. She felt the room tilt, like the floor had been built on lies and someone had just kicked the support beams out. Derek's voice grew louder, more confident, like he was feeding off the silence. She's a liability, financially, emotionally, professionally. I can't let her drag me down anymore. Liability, not wife, not mother of his children. Liability. and right beside him stood Marissa Conway, his wealthy boss, the woman who had been physically present in every step of this unraveling. Marissa's hand rested on Derek's back, not quite an embrace, more like ownership. Her smile was small, controlled, satisfied. Behind them sat Karen Mullen, lips curled in approval as if she'd been waiting for this announcement the way some people wait for dessert. Lillian's ears rang. Her mind reached for logic. This can't be happening like this. Not here, not in front of everyone. But Derek was doing it here because that was the point. Public humiliation wasn't a mistake for him. It was a display. Lillian took a step forward. She didn't want to fight. She wanted to understand. She wanted to say, "I'm carrying your children." She wanted to say, "You don't have to do this." But before she could even open her mouth, two security guards moved into her path. Event security, not personal bodyguards, just men in matching polo shirts hired for safety that evening. Faces blank the way faces get when they're paid to obey. One of them lifted a hand slightly, not touching her, just blocking her like a wall. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you need to step back." Mr. Combs asked that speeches not be interrupted. "Step back." Lillian looked past him at Derek. Her eyes begged without asking. Derek didn't move. That was when she understood the cruelest thing. Orders had already been given. This wasn't a decision made in the moment. This was arranged, coordinated, planned. A burst of laughter erupted from someone near the back, too loud, too uncomfortable. Then whispers, then the hum of recording devices. The crowd had turned into an audience. Karen's voice floated from her seat, sweet and sharp at the same time. "Don't cause a scene, Lillian," she said, as if Derek wasn't the one holding a microphone like a weapon. Marissa leaned toward Derek and murmured something. Lillian couldn't hear the words, but Derek's face tightened with satisfaction. He was being guided like a puppet that thought it was a king. Lillian tried again to move forward. Security shifted with her. Marissa didn't look away. She didn't need to. She knew Lillian had nowhere to go inside that room. Then Derek lowered the microphone and spoke without it, voice still loud enough to carry. "You're done," he said, eyes cold. "You're not embarrassing me anymore." Embarrassing him. Lillian's throat burned. She forced a breath in slowly, trying to keep her twins calm. Her hands trembled at her sides, but she didn't raise them. She refused to look desperate in front of people who were hungry for it. That's when the first suitcase landed outside, a heavy thud. Then another. Someone had opened the front door. Someone had gone upstairs. Someone had grabbed Lillian's things like they were trash and thrown them onto the lawn. The sound of the suitcases hitting the ground was strangely loud, final, like punctuation. Lillian's legs moved before her mind caught up. She turned and walked toward the door, not fast, not panicked, because she couldn't afford to fall. Not like this. Not pregnant, not in front of them. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. Her suitcases sat on the grass like evidence she didn't belong inside anymore. And there, near the doorway, stood Marissa, wearing Lillian's robe. Not a similar robe. Not a new one. Lillian recognized the small loose thread at the sleeve she had sewn it herself 2 weeks ago while Derek was on a work call. At some point, while Lillian had been kept at the doorway by security, Marissa had slipped upstairs, changed, and walked back out like the house already belonged to her. Marissa adjusted the robe belt slowly, eyes glittering with calm cruelty. "So this is where we'll live?" she said lightly, looking around as if the house had already changed owners. Lillian stared. For a second, her mind went blank, not because she was weak, but because the boldness of it was unreal. This wasn't just betrayal. This was replacement. Marissa wasn't stealing a man quietly. She was stepping into Lillian's life and trying it on like a dress. Behind her, people stepped outside to watch neighbors, guests, corporate allies with nice shoes and curious faces. Some pretended to be concerned. Some didn't bother pretending. Phones were up now. Fully up. The humiliation wasn't accidental. It was being documented. Lillian's medical bag was still inside. The one with her prenatal records, her vitamins, the emergency numbers her doctor insisted she keep. Her hand went to her stomach again, twins rolling, unsettled. "I need my bag," she said, voice trembling now despite her effort. "My medical bag." Derek walked out behind Marissa like he belonged to her shadow. He looked at Lillian as if she was asking for luxury instead of basic care. "What now?" he snapped. "You always overreact." "Overreact." Lillian's eyes widened. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words coming out sharper than she meant. "With your children." Derek's mouth tightened. He stepped closer, and his hands shot out, grabbing her arm hard enough to make her gasp. "You're not my problem anymore," he said through his teeth. Lillian tried to pull back. Pain flashed through her arm, then down her side. She clutched her belly instinctively. The slap came fast, a sharp crack that echoed through the yard. Lillian's head turned with the force of it. For a second, she saw stars. Then silence. Total silence. No one screamed. No one moved. No one stepped forward. Phones kept recording. One woman near the back flinched and half-stepped forward, but Karen's hand closed around her wrist and pulled her back with a quiet, "It's domestic. Don't interfere." Marissa didn't flinch. She simply watched, eyes steady, as if this was a lesson being taught in public. Karen's voice drifted from the doorway, pleased and calm. "She brought this on herself," she said, like she was describing a mess on the floor. Lillian's cheek burned. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of them. She tasted metal blood from where she'd bitten the inside of her mouth. She looked at Derek one last time, waiting for something: regret, hesitation, a flicker of humanity. There was nothing. That was the moment her heart stopped trying to save the marriage. She bent down slowly, barefoot in the grass, lifting one suitcase at a time. Every movement hurt. Her belly felt heavy, low, dangerous. But she kept moving because stopping meant collapsing. A car engine hummed softly across the street. Lillian's gaze lifted. A black sedan idled there, parked just far enough to be unnoticed by most people. Inside, someone sat very still, watching the scene like it mattered. Lillian didn't recognize the face through the glass, but the feeling that hit her was immediate and strange, like she was being observed by someone who knew more about her life than she did. Someone connected, somehow, to Josephine's careful, hidden world. The man in the sedan lifted his phone not to gossip, but to record. Angles steady and professional, as if following instructions. And as Lillian slid into her car, shaking, she didn't see Marissa's satisfied smile fade for the first time. Just for a second, like Marissa had noticed the sedan too, and didn't like it. Somewhere, a sealed estate letter addressed to Lillian had already been delivered to this house and signed for by another hand, and someone inside was ready to make sure she never touched it. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Marissa Conway held it between two fingers like it might stain her skin, standing alone by the living room fireplace as the house finally emptied of guests and noise. The robe tied around her waist. Lillian's robe still carried the faint smell of laundry soap and something softer, something domestic. Marissa ignored that. She ignored everything that wasn't useful. The envelope was thick, sealed, official, the kind of mail that didn't come often. It had arrived earlier that afternoon by courier, while Lillian was getting ready upstairs and Derek was out front pretending to manage caterers. The doorbell had rung. Marissa had opened it like it was already her house. She had signed the electronic pad with a practiced flourish. The courier hadn't questioned her. Now, hours later, she turned the envelope over under the lamplight. On the front, printed neatly in black ink, was to Miss Lillian Foster Ray. Estate of the late Josephine Conley. Marissa's eyes narrowed. Derek had said Lillian's mother was simple, small town, nothing special. Derek had said it like a fact, like he'd lived the woman's life himself. But Marissa had learned long ago that men like Derek repeated whatever made them feel superior. They didn't verify. They didn't investigate. They just believed what fed their ego. Marissa ran a fingernail over the seal. She didn't need a knife. She didn't need permission. She had walked into Lillian's home like she belonged. She had watched Derek slap a pregnant woman in public and felt no fear. That meant the house was already hers, at least in Derek's mind. So she opened the envelope. Her eyes moved quickly over the first page, scanning for numbers, for names, for anything that explained why the paper looked so expensive, why the language felt so careful. Then her breath paused. Not a gasp, Marissa didn't gasp, but something inside her tightened, sharp and unfamiliar. There were words she recognized immediately. Trust, executor, beneficiary. And there was another name, printed like the center of the universe, Lillian Foster. Marissa's mouth went dry. For half a second she stood completely still, listening to the quiet of the house. Derek was in another room, on the phone again, probably enjoying the feeling of being free, probably believing he had just upgraded his life. Marissa didn't share his excitement. Excitement was for people who didn't understand risk. She read faster. The letter wasn't a full breakdown, not yet. It was a notification. A formal notice that the law firm representing the Foster Global Trust had attempted contact. That Josephine Conley's estate process was moving forward. That the intended recipient, Lillian Foster, needed to respond in order to unlock further instructions. Marissa's eyes flicked down and caught the law firm name at the bottom. Not a small neighborhood office. Not the kind of place that handled ordinary wills. A serious firm with an international reputation. The kind of firm that served clients whose money quietly shaped markets. Marissa's thoughts sharpened, cold and quick. What if Josephine Conley wasn't who Derek said she was? What if Lillian wasn't who he thought she was? And what happens if Lillian finds out, after what we just did to her? She glanced toward the hallway. Derek would ruin this if he knew. Derek would panic. Derek would talk too much. Derek would make calls, beg, expose himself. And if Lillian had something bigger behind her, Derek's begging could bring attention. Attention was dangerous. Marissa stared at the letter again, then at the fire. The fire was already burning, slow and steady, throwing orange light across the walls like it didn't care what it consumed. Marissa hesitated only 1 second, then she fed the pages into the flames. The paper curled, blackened, cracked. If that's real, she murmured, voice low, almost calm, she'll never find out. Ash lifted into the air. A small part of her watched the fire with something close to satisfaction, not because she enjoyed cruelty, but because she enjoyed control. Knowledge was power. And taking knowledge away from someone else, that was the cleanest kind of power there was. Behind her, the floor creaked. Marissa turned. Derek stood there, loosening his tie, looking pleased with himself like he had just won a competition. What's that? He asked, nodding at the flames. Marissa's expression didn't change. Junk mail, she said smoothly. Probably sympathy letters from some law office. You know how people get after someone dies. Derek shrugged, like it didn't matter. Good. I don't want her getting emotional again. We need this clean. Emotional again. Marissa studied him for a beat, this man who had slapped his pregnant wife and called her a liability, then complained about her feelings as if they were an inconvenience. He was useful, but he was also weak, and weak men were easy to replace. Lillian sat in her car with her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her keys. Her cheek throbbed where Derek had hit her. Her arm ached where he'd grabbed her. The twins pressed low, as if trying to hide inside her. She didn't drive yet. She couldn't, because the silence after public humiliation was louder than the humiliation itself. It left room for thoughts to attack. How did he become this? Or was he always this, and I just refused to see it? Lillian wiped her face with the back of her hand and stared at the house she'd believed was home. Then she remembered Josephine's old phone. The outdated phone Lillian had kept for years on a bedroom shelf, the one Derek called junk. She'd grabbed it instinctively when she packed in panic, like her hands knew it mattered even when her mind didn't. Lillian dug through her bag until she felt it cool and dead at the bottom. She pressed the power button. Nothing. She plugged it into the car charger, waited, pressed again, whispering, "Come on, please." The screen blinked. Then, slowly, it lit up. A single voicemail notification appeared, one unheard message. Lillian's breath caught. The timestamp made her stomach drop days ago, right after her mother went into the hospital. Her thumb hovered. The timestamp made her stomach drop days ago, right after her mother went into the hospital, from a law firm. Lillian stared at the screen as if it might explain itself. Why would a law firm call this number? Why would they leave a message weeks ago? Why didn't I know? Her thumb moved to press play. The screen froze. The phone went still in her hand. Lillian's pulse pounded in her ears, loud enough to drown out everything else. She hit the button again. Nothing. Just that frozen screen, that trapped message. Like the truth was right there, and something time, neglect, or someone else's interference had already started trying to keep it from her. Across the street, the black sedan idled quietly. And as Lillian stared at the frozen voicemail, she didn't see the shadow inside the car lift a phone of their own, not to gossip, but to report, in a low voice. that the subject has left the house. Escalation confirmed. Somewhere, the next message from that law firm was already being queued, and Lillian was about to learn how fast lies can become official when you don't know what you're entitled to. The voicemail finally played like a door cracking open, then slamming the whole world into place. Lillian had to wait for it. She was still in the driver's seat, the old phone warm in her palm, battery just alive enough now. Earlier, when she tried to listen, the screen had frozen and left the message trapped. Now, with the phone finally awake, that old message from the law firm began to play. She pressed play. The voice on the recording was calm, professional, the kind of calm that felt almost cruel when your life was falling apart. This message is for Miss Lillian Foster. My name is Mr. Bennett Swanson. I'm calling from the law firm representing the estate of Josephine Conley. Lillian's throat tightened. Estate. Representing. The word sounded like a language meant for other people. The message continued. We've activated the estate process in line with Miss Conley's instructions. We've attempted to reach you on file several times. A sealed notification letter has been delivered to your marital address and signed for. It's important you contact us as soon as possible to acknowledge receipt and discuss next steps as beneficiary. Again, this is Bennett Swanson calling. Beneficiary. The word hung in the air like a foreign object. Lillian didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even move. She sat in her car, phone pressed to her ear long after the message ended, listening to the silence where truth had been waiting for weeks while she was being pushed out of her own life like trash. Her cheeks still throbbed. Her arms still ached. The twins shifted inside her as if they were restless, as if they could feel their mother's body turning cold with understanding. Someone had taken her mail. Someone had made sure she stayed unaware. And suddenly, the fireplace, the robe, Marissa inside the house, the junk mail, the way Derek let everything happen. It lined up too neatly to be coincidence. Lillian stared at the dark windshield. Her mother's voice floated up from memory, soft and warning. Freedom is quiet. And Lillian realized something that made her stomach drop again. Josephine hadn't just lived quietly. Josephine had prepared quietly. Prepared for exactly this kind of cruelty. Lillian reached up and wiped her face once, more from habit than emotion. Her eyes were dry, but her breathing was sharp. Every breath felt like it had to fight its way through shock. She glanced at the old phone, the outdated one. Josephine once told her to keep charged, just in case someone important needed to reach you about me. Lillian didn't understand how much her mother had hidden. Not yet. But she understood this. If a lawyer was calling her beneficiary and talking about sealed letters, then Josephine's small life had been a lie meant to protect her. And Marissa Conway had just burned a part of that protection to ash. Lillian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She could either collapse under this, or she could learn how to move like her mother moved. Quiet, careful, unseen until it was too late. She didn't drive to a shelter. She didn't drive to a friend's couch. She drove to an address Josephine once gave her on a small card, years ago, tucked inside a plain envelope. Josephine had said, "Only if you ever need it." Lillian had laughed then, a little. Need what? Josephine's eyes had stayed serious. Need to be believed. The office building wasn't flashy. No glass sculptures, no marble fountains. Just 4 floors of brick and a simple plaque by the entrance. Newman Legal Group. Lillian's stomach clenched as she stepped out. The twins made her feel heavy, slow. Her body wanted rest. Her mind refused it. Inside, the waiting room smelled like paper and clean air. Not warmth, not comfort, just professionalism. A woman looked up from behind the front desk. Then she truly looked, eyes narrowing the way people's eyes do when they recognize a face they were expecting. She stood immediately, face changing from neutral to focused. Lillian, the woman said softly, like she already knew her. Sandra Newman was in her early 40s, a family and estate protection lawyer. She didn't have the fake sweetness of people who pretended to care. She had the controlled calm of someone who dealt with betrayal for a living. Josephine had trusted her. That alone made her different. Sandra's role wasn't just legal paperwork, she was a strategic anchor, the person who could turn pain into a plan. Sandra came around the desk and took in the whole picture fast. Bruised cheek, swelling around the arm, pregnancy strain. The way Lillian held herself like a person trying not to fall apart. I wondered how long it would take, Sandra said gently. Your mother was very specific. Lillian's throat tightened. My mom, she started. Sandra held up a hand not to silence her, but to steady her. I know, Sandra said. Let's sit. If you start feeling dizzy, we pause and call your OB. No heroics. That practical concern loosened something in Lillian's chest. For the first time that day, someone was treating her like a human being, not a problem or a prop. They moved into a private office. Sandra offered water, tissues, a seat with armrests. Lillian sat, hands resting over her belly. She didn't talk like a dramatic victim. She spoke in facts, because facts were safer than feelings right now. She told Sandra about the fundraiser, the chair, the standing with assistants, the audit papers in the kitchen, Derek's mother, the slap, the suitcases thrown out, the frozen voicemail, the mention of a sealed letter signed for by someone else. Sandra's eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. She simply listened, and the stillness in her face told Lillian something powerful. This wasn't unbelievable here. This was recognizable. When Lillian finished, Sandra leaned back and said quietly, Okay. We move clean. We move once. Your mother knew these people were capable of this. That's why we're here. That sentence felt like oxygen. Sandra tapped her desk phone. Antonio, she said. I need you in my office. Antonio Sampson was a private investigator in his late 30s, the kind of man who spoke softly because he didn't need volume. His role was proof, real proof, not gossip, not feelings, evidence that could stand up in court and in public. He arrived within the hour, carrying a slim folder and a camera bag. When Lillian saw him, something clicked. He had the same calm stillness as the man in the sedan. I've already been watching the house, he said, voice low, eyes sharp. Your mother asked me to be on standby once she updated her will. She didn't want to interfere in your marriage, but she didn't trust your husband's ambition. On standby, Lillian's pulse jumped. Her mother really had prepared. Antonio spread photographs across the table, Marissa entering the house. Marissa taking mail from the courier. Marissa leaving with a stack of letters. Marissa standing by the fireplace, paper in her hand, flames reflecting in the glass. Lillian's breath caught again. She could almost smell the imagined smoke, could almost hear Marissa's quiet voice from earlier. If that's real, she'll never find out. Sandra didn't react emotionally. She reacted strategically. We'll need financial proof too, she said. Renee. Renee Gilbert was a forensic accountant in her mid-30s, precise and quick, with eyes that looked like they could read lies off paper. Her role was numbers tracking transfers, templates, timestamps, and digital footprints, turning manipulation into undeniable evidence. She joined them that same afternoon via secure video, then in person 2 days later, laptop open, already inside a web of statements and logs. The audit file accusing Lillian of siphoning money, Renee said. That template is a copy from Conway Strategic Finance, not HR. Metadata shows it was created on a workstation in Marissa Conway's division, then exported and printed. The timing lines up with Derek's recent complaints. Lillian's fingers curled. She'd noticed the template mismatch earlier, but hearing it confirmed made her feel something new. Not hope, power. Sandra slid a stack of papers toward Lillian. Divorce papers. Not dramatic, not revenge-fueled, clean, controlled. This is step one, Sandra said. We file. We ask for protective orders. We put the joint assets and the babies under court protection. Then we coordinate with the estate lawyers. Your mother's trust team will be fully involved now that there's evidence of interference with estate correspondence. Lillian stared at the papers. Derek had tried to erase her. Now she was signing herself into a new reality. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. Then she steadied it. For the first time since the expulsion, Lillian's voice came out firm. They wanted me silent, she said. Let's show them what they missed. Sandra nodded once. Antonio gathered the photographs. Renee saved the files. The room wasn't full of pity. It was full of quiet weapons. Antonio paused at the door, hand on the knob, as if debating whether to say the next part. There's something else, he said. Lillian looked up, pen still in her fingers. Yesterday, Antonio said, your husband tried accessing trust records linked to your mother's name and your maiden name. The attempt got flagged. That's how Mr. Swanson's firm realized things were escalating. Trust records. That meant Derek wasn't just leaving her, he was hunting. Lillian's mouth tightened into something almost calm. He doesn't know what he's touching, she said softly. As she said it, her own phone buzzed, a new notification from an unknown number, short and chilling. Soon, this ends. The wording was Derek's, even if the name wasn't there. Sandra glanced at the screen, then at Lillian. It ends, Sandra said, but not the way he thinks. Somewhere, Derek was already planning to make his version of the story official before the will reading and the trust lawyers could make his actions official in a different way. The first email hit the screen like a gunshot. Several long days passed between the night Lillian signed the divorce papers and the next time she sat across from Renee and Sandra in that same office. Days filled with medical checks, rest, and careful paperwork. Sandra insisted on it. No war, if your blood pressure is spiking. By the time Lillian came back, the swelling on her cheek had faded, but the memory hadn't. Renee's laptop chimed one small sound, huge meaning, and Sandra leaned in while Lillian held her breath, hands pressed over her belly as if she could keep the twins calm by sheer will. The message wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a guess. It was a clean, cold trail of words. From Marissa Conway to Derek Combs, subject, make her look unstable. Renee clicked it open. Lillian's stomach tightened. The twins kicked like they felt the danger in the air. For a second, she tasted the same metal she tasted the day Derek slapped her. Not because it was happening again, but because she could finally see it had been planned. The emailed text was short, strategic. Use the language we discussed: concern, unpredictable, emotional strain on your career. Frame this as you trying to protect the company and your future. HR responds better to instability than to conflict. Renee scrolled. More messages. Marissa telling Derek exactly what to say, exactly when to say it, how to turn a pregnant wife into a liability without sounding like a monster. Don't call her crazy. Say you're worried about her judgment. Remind them she's been asking questions about money. Make that sound impulsive, like she doesn't understand stress. If you involve security, emphasize safety and tension at home, not anger. It'll give you cover later. Marissa's language was polished, corporate, almost gentle. Use concern, use process, use HR, use documentation. Sandra's face stayed calm, but her eyes sharpened. This is coaching, she said quietly. Not an affair accident. This is orchestration. She weaponized corporate systems and your husband's ego. Lillian stared at the screen. She didn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere around the time she realized she couldn't beg for dignity anymore. What she felt now was worse than sadness. She felt rewritten. They had been writing a story about her while she was living inside it. The investigation had moved faster than Derek ever imagined because it didn't start from scratch. Josephine Conley had set pieces in motion long before anyone understood why. Once Antonio handed his footage to Mr. Swanson's estate team, the trust lawyers filed emergency motions. The company's legal department received preservation notices and subpoenas. Compliance officers who had once listened politely to Marissa now had to turn over logs, backups, audit trails. Antonio placed a flash drive on Sandra's desk. Security footage from the house and the street, he said. Date stamped. Chain of custody documented. Renee plugged it in. Video loaded. There was Marissa, inside Lillian's home, moving through the hallway like she had a key. There was Marissa, stopping at the door to sign for a courier envelope. There was Marissa entering with letters in her hand. There was Marissa at the fireplace, her body blocking the camera for a second, then stepping aside while paper curled in the flames. Lillian's throat tightened. She could almost smell the smoke again, could almost hear her own heartbeat from that night on the lawn. Sandra didn't let the moment linger too long. Emotion was important. Strategy needed oxygen too. We don't react, Sandra said. We build. Renee clicked open bank records next. Numbers moved across the screen like a language of betrayal. Joint funds rerouted. Not once, not twice. Repeated transfers small enough to hide, frequent enough to bleed a family dry. Payment descriptions disguised as consulting, event support, executive hospitality. Renee pointed at one line and said, that account belongs to a holding company Marissa controls. The transfers line up with dates Derek took her to private dinners and company trips he told you were mandatory. Lillian's mind flashed to the canceled cards, The "you're overreacting" arguments. The way Derek acted like she was demanding too much when she just wanted groceries to clear. Now she understood. They had needed her to look guilty so no one would question the cruelty. Sandra began building the folder, digital and physical. Hard copies, metadata, chain of custody statements. Every document stamped and organized so it couldn't be dismissed as emotion. Lillian watched the folder grow thicker and thicker. It felt strange, seeing her pain turned into evidence. It made the betrayal feel both more real and more survivable. At one point, Sandra looked at her and asked gently, "Are you okay to keep going? We can pause." Lillian nodded once, because she couldn't afford to stop. Not with twins coming, not with Derek already sniffing around trust records. "Keep going," Lillian said softly. "I want every piece." Sandra's next step wasn't court, it was timing. "They humiliated you in public," Sandra said. "So the truth has to be seen too." Not whispered. Seen. But we choose where. Lillian's chest tightened. Public meant facing eyes again. Cameras again. It meant standing in front of people who once watched her get erased. Sandra tapped a calendar on her desk. "The estate lawyers have set a formal will reading," she explained. "Anyone named as an heir, alternate, or interested party is required or strongly requested to attend. Because he was your spouse when your mother died, and because he tried to access trust records, Derek is on the list. Marissa and the company's representatives have been notified as parties potentially involved in interference." Lillian's brows pulled together. "Why would he agree to show up?" Sandra's voice stayed level. "Because he still thinks your mother was small town. He'll assume this is a minor will. He'll expect to use it as a stage to paint you as unstable. He won't be able to resist an audience," Antonio added. "And he won't know what's coming until the documents are read." So Derek wasn't just cruel. He was greedy enough and arrogant enough to walk straight into an official room, holding evidence with his name all over it. Lillian stared down at her hands. Her ring was gone now. Her wrist still had a faint bruise, but her mind felt clearer than it had in months. "They called me nothing," she said. Renee looked up. Lillian's voice grew steadier. "So the folder will speak." Sandra nodded once. "Exactly." A week later, Derek received a plain envelope from the estate firm. He was in Marissa's office when he opened it. Marissa, sitting behind her desk, heels crossed, face composed but tighter than usual. He scanned the words and laughed. "She thinks this is a game," Derek said, waving the notice. "A will reading. That's for rich people. Her mom was nobody. We'll go, sit through the drama, make sure they know she's unstable, and I'll walk out clean." "Nobody." He said it like he was proud of himself for believing it. "I'll shut it down," he added. "I'll tell them about the money transfers. About how she's been." They had already signed the courthouse papers 2 days earlier. Nothing romantic, just a registry office, signatures, and an upgraded ring. Marissa didn't want a big wedding yet. She wanted documents that said this new life was official. Marissa didn't laugh. She stared at the letter longer than necessary. Her fingers tightened slightly around her pen. The notice was from Bennett Swanson, trustee counsel. It had words she understood all too well. Global trust, significant holdings, governance meeting, mandatory attendance, potential conflicts of interest to be addressed. Something had shifted in her eyes, something Derek didn't notice because Derek only noticed what fed him. "Marissa?" he asked. "You okay?" She forced a small smile. "Of course," she said. "We'll handle it. Just be prepared to answer questions about your marriage. Stick to what we practiced." Her voice was steady. Her pulse was not. That night, alone in her apartment, Marissa opened her laptop and typed, "Josephine Conley Foster Global Trust." The loading circle spun. For a moment, nothing happened. Then results began to appear slowly, selectively, like the internet itself was deciding how much truth she deserved. Regulatory filings, philanthropic shells, old articles about a reclusive financial architect whose structures manage capital in the trillions for pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, global institutions always behind other names, other boards, other brands. Marissa's face went still. Not shocked the way normal people got shocked. Still the way predators got still when they realized the prey wasn't prey at all. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She closed the laptop slowly. For the first time, fear outweighed ambition. And in that same quiet moment, Derek's phone buzzed with another message from an acquaintance in HR, one that would push him to double down on his narrative. just as the will reading was being locked into the calendar. If you're separating from her, you should get ahead of this. People are talking. Document everything. Derek smiled at the screen. He had no idea documentation was exactly what would bury him. The doors shut with a soft click that sounded louder than a slam. In that instant, Derek Combs felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, small. Not because he was afraid of a will reading. He told himself he wasn't. He had walked into the building confident, shoulders back, wearing his best suit like armor. He told himself he was here to watch Lillian fail one last time in public. That was the plan. He had even practiced the lines in his head. I'm concerned about her stability. We're in the middle of a separation. I'm only here to answer questions. He imagined people nodding at him, whispering that he was brave for leaving her. He imagined Marissa Conway smiling behind him, proud of how clean he made it. But the room didn't feel like a place where men like Derek won. It felt like a place where truth lived in paper. The space was plain, no glamour, no stage lights, yet everything about it carried weight. The long conference table, the thick folders, the quiet people in suits who didn't smile for approval. Trustees, legal witnesses, representatives from the Trust Audit Committee. People who looked like they dealt with consequences for a living. Derek's eyes scanned the room for Lillian. He saw her a second later, and he almost didn't recognize her. Lillian Foster walked in slowly, 8 months pregnant with twins, but upright, not broken, not pleading. Her face was calm, her hair neat, her expression controlled in a way Derek had never truly understood. She moved like a woman who had already decided she would survive with or without anyone's permission. At her side was Sandra Newman, calm, prepared, a neat stack of folders at her seat. Sandra took a chair beside Lillian as if she belonged at that table. Because she did. Derek's stomach tightened. Why did Lillian look prepared? He told himself it was fake. He told himself she was bluffing. He told himself she was still the same woman he slapped and called a liability. Then he noticed something else. Marissa Conway, once his boss. Now his new wife entered behind him, heels precise, face composed, but today her expression had a new layer. Tension. She sat near Derek, not beside him. Close enough to be associated, far enough to step away if needed. That detail should have warned him. But Derek had always been slow to read anything that didn't feed his ego. At the front of the room sat Mr. Benny Swanson, the estate and trust attorney, mid-50s. Calm voice, eyes that didn't flinch. He wasn't here to comfort anyone. His role was to execute Josephine Conley's legal instructions exactly as written. Around him sat trustees and legal witnesses, people assigned to confirm the process was proper. Their job was to make the truth official. Mr. Swanson opened a folder. The estate of Josephine Conley will now be addressed, he said evenly. Please remember that this meeting is being audio recorded and certain sections will be transcribed into court filings if necessary. The room became quiet enough to hear breathing. Derek sat back, confident again for a moment. Josephine Lillian's small-town mother. He had decided she was nothing. This would be nothing. Mr. Swanson began reading. Assets, foundations, holdings, companies with names Derek didn't recognize, layered through trusts and charitable vehicles. Numbers that sounded almost unreal. Derek's confidence began to wobble. Not from guilt, Derek didn't do guilt easily, but from confusion. Why did this sound so big? He glanced at Marissa. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, not blinking enough. Mr. Swanson continued, voice steady. These holdings are managed through the Foster Global Trust, he said. Foster? Derek frowned. That was Lillian's name now, but it had been her name before him too. He had never cared enough to ask why. He shifted in his seat. The numbers kept climbing. Millions, hundreds of millions, then billions. Derek's mouth went dry. He tried to laugh under his breath just to remind himself he was still Derek, still in control. No one joined him. Then Mr. Swanson reached the line that cracked the room open like glass. And the sole heir to the Foster Global Trust, valued at $10 billion as of the most recent audit, is Lillian Foster. That was the sentence that made Derek's hands start to shake. For a second, Derek laughed. One sharp burst. Then he stopped. Because no one else laughed. Because the room didn't react like it had heard a joke. Because Lillian didn't even blink. Derek's throat tightened, and the laugh died in his mouth like something choking. 10 billion? His mind tried to reject it. It felt too large to hold, too absurd. He had called her dead weight. He had thrown her out. He had. Marissa stood abruptly. Her chair scraped the floor, loud in the silence. "That's impossible," she said, voice too sharp. She stopped herself. Because she almost said nothing. And suddenly Marissa's composure broke just enough for everyone to see the crack. "Mr. Swanson raised a hand calmly, as if he'd dealt with disruption many times before. "Miss Conway," he said, "you will have an opportunity to respond. Sit down, please." It wasn't a suggestion. Marissa sat, slowly. Mr. Swanson continued. "Multiple attempts were made to contact Miss Foster," he said, turning a page, "including a sealed letter delivered to her marital address. Our records show that letter was signed for by another adult at the residence and did not reach the intended recipient." Derek swallowed hard. Mr. Swanson's voice stayed even, but the room felt colder. "Subsequently," he went on, "our client's private investigator documented the destruction of estate correspondence inside that home." Destruction. Derek's eyes flicked to Marissa. Marissa's face drained. Mr. Swanson nodded to a technician near the wall. A monitor lit up. Footage. The video played silently at first, the courier at the door, Marissa signing, the envelope in her hand, then Marissa at the fireplace, feeding paper into flames. Derek's hands began to shake. He didn't want to look at the screen, but he couldn't stop. His body betrayed him the way he had betrayed Lillian. Then emails appeared, printed copies slid across the table, digital version mirrored on the monitor. Marissa coaching Derek, telling him how to frame Lillian as unstable, how to weaponize HR language, how to make a heavily pregnant woman look dangerous instead of injured. Around him, witnesses shifted in their seats. Some faces hardened, some brows lifted. People weren't whispering now, they were judging. And Derek realized something terrifying. This room wasn't his audience. It was his trial. Lillian stood, slowly. She didn't slam her hands on the table. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply stood, pregnant, bruises faint but not forgotten, calm. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that people leaned in. "I was called nothing," she said. Silence. Her eyes moved to Derek. "You were right." She continued softly. Derek's throat tightened. For the first time, he wanted to speak, not to attack, but to stop whatever was coming. He had nothing. Lillian's voice didn't rise. "I was everything you couldn't see." And in that moment, Derek understood the true cruelty of his own choice. He had abandoned a woman who was richer than anything he could ever become. But more than that, he had abandoned a woman who had been loyal. And loyalty, once broken, didn't return. A security officer from the Trust's internal team stepped forward from the corner of the room. Professional, firm, he approached Marissa. "Miss Conway," he said quietly, "you're required to remain available for further questioning. Company counsel has been notified. You understand that?" Marissa's eyes flicked to Derek. Just one look. And she stepped back, not toward him, away from him, as if he was already sinking. As if she had just decided he wasn't worth saving. And Derek, still shaking, suddenly realized the next public room wouldn't be a will reading, it would be a courtroom, and he wouldn't be the one holding the microphone. The courtroom doors opened, and Derek Combs walked in like a man stepping into a storm he could no longer talk his way out of. His hands were still, too still. His face was tight, eyes red from nights without sleep. He wore a suit that used to make him feel powerful, but today it looked like a costume on a man who had lost his script. The room was packed, not with cheering guests like the party where he humiliated Lillian, but with people who didn't clap for cruelty, court staff, legal interns. A few corporate faces from his old company, there as silent observers. Even Karen Mullen, his mother, sat stiff and pale, her mouth pressed into a thin line like she was trying to hold her pride inside her teeth. She was learning the hard way that a courtroom wasn't a living room. You couldn't bully the judge into agreeing with you. Lillian Foster entered next, still pregnant but closer to her due date now, walking carefully but with her head high. Her bruises were faint, but her composure was sharper than pain. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't trembling. She looked like a woman who had learned something sharp. Mercy is not owed to people who weaponize your silence. Sandra Newman walked beside her, calm and prepared, a stack of folders in her hands. Derek's throat tightened when he saw those folders. Folders were truth. And truth was what he had been avoiding. The judge wasn't on a raised stage in this story, no dramatic movie speeches, no theatrical gavel slams. The judge's presence was felt through order and rules, through the way people stood when told, through the way voices lowered automatically. The courtroom didn't care about Derek's ego, it cared about evidence. Derek had already been fired. It happened fast after the will reading. His company's risk department moved first, followed by HR. His access badge stopped working. His inbox was frozen, pending internal review. Calls from his manager stopped. The official letter arrived a few days later. Employment terminated effective immediately, subject to ongoing investigation into serious policy violations. His allies vanished with the speed of trained animals. The same people who had laughed at his jokes stopped responding. The same executives who had watched Lillian stand with assistants suddenly had urgent meetings they couldn't miss. Even Karen noticed that neighbors who once praised her successful son now averted their eyes at the grocery store. The humiliation he created had turned around and hunted him. And Derek, for the first time, understood what it felt like to be erased. Sandra didn't waste time. She opened the first folder. She didn't speak like an angry woman. She spoke like a surgeon. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "this matter involves financial manipulation within the marriage, domestic intimidation, attempted interference with an estate process, and coordinated reputational harm against my client while she was 8 months pregnant with twins." Derek flinched at the framing. Sandra presented the documents like bricks building a wall Derek couldn't climb. Renee Gilbert's forensic reports showed the audit template accusing Lillian of siphoning funds was created in Marissa's department, not by HR. Metadata, timestamps, user IDs. It wasn't someone could have. It was, this is who did. Antonio's footage showed Marissa entering the home, removing estate mail, burning correspondence. Swanson's letter logs showed delivery, signature by M. Conway, and no response from Lillian. Bank records documented joint funds rerouted into accounts linked to Marissa's holding company. Texts and emails showed Marissa coaching Derek word for word how to frame Lillian as unstable, how to use concern and safety as excuses, how to turn a public expulsion into a narrative where he looked like the victim. Even the night of the party had been prepared. Security briefings, notes instructing them not to let Lillian back inside if things got emotional, orders to escort her out if necessary. Derek's lawyer tried to argue marital conflict, mixed messages, stress from pregnancy. Sandra didn't raise her voice. She simply turned another page, and another. It was like watching a dam break, but quietly. Lillian sat beside Sandra, hands folded over her belly, eyes fixed ahead. She didn't look at Derek. She didn't need to. She was done seeking his humanity. The judge listened. And when Derek's lawyer finally paused, the judge spoke in a voice that made the whole room feel colder. The words were simple, but the meaning was heavy. Temporary sole decision-making for Lillian regarding medical and financial matters during the pregnancy. Protective orders limiting Derek's contact. Restrictions on him coming near the marital home or hospital without court permission. Orders freezing any attempt by Derek to access estate or trust records on Lillian's behalf. Derek's chest tightened. Custody-related restrictions meant he couldn't just show up and demand access to the babies when they were born. Everything would go through court. Financial restraints meant he couldn't grab at money like a desperate man anymore. The judge didn't need to call him cruel. The law did it for him. Derek stood too quickly, as if standing could restore some of the power he lost. "Your Honor, he started, voice cracking. "She's turning everyone against me. I didn't know about the trust. I was misled." Marissa, he wanted to explain. He wanted to blame Marissa. He wanted to say he was just under pressure. He wanted to say he didn't know the letter was about billions. But the judge didn't let him finish. One raised hand, one firm interruption. "This is not the venue to relitigate the trust," the judge said. "We are dealing with your conduct as a spouse and father. Sit down, Mr. Combs." The courtroom didn't need Derek's performance. It already had Derek's pattern. Derek sat down like a man being lowered into a grave of his own decisions. Karen's face hardened beside him, but her eyes darted around the room. She was watching the crowd, watching who still looked at her with respect. And she was realizing something too. This time, her authority couldn't override the truth. When the hearing ended, Derek followed Lillian out. His steps were fast, desperate, almost childlike. He pushed through the exit doors as if fresh air could fix what the courtroom had sealed. Lillian walked carefully down the steps, Sandra beside her, Antonio nearby like quiet protection. Derek called her name. Lillian, he said, voice raw. Wait, please. The word please sounded wrong in his mouth, like he'd borrowed it from someone kinder. Lillian didn't stop. Derek reached out, fingers stretching as if touching her sleeve could bring back the life he threw away. He didn't grab her. He knew cameras might be there, but the intention was still ugly, possessive. Sandra shifted slightly, placing herself between them without drama. Lillian finally spoke, but she didn't turn around. Her voice was calm, low, almost tired. You should have asked for my side, she said. That was it. Not an insult, not a scream, just one sentence that exposed everything Derek had refused to do. Listen, Derek swallowed hard. He wanted to say he was sorry. He wanted to say he didn't know. He wanted to say he got swept up. But the truth was simple. He chose to believe lies because lies promised him status. Lillian walked on, and Derek stood there, watching the back of the woman he once called a liability. Now she was walking away with her future protected by law, and he was left holding nothing but his own shame. A few minutes later, when the crowd had thinned, Derek looked around, searching for Marissa. She wasn't there. No heels clicking behind him. No cold hand guiding him. No confident smile. Just absence. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a single message, from a number he knew too well. Marissa's. Don't contact me again. Handle your own mess. Derek's blood went cold, because in one line, he understood the final betrayal. Marissa wasn't falling with him. She was leaving him behind. And somewhere Marissa was already making her next move, one that would decide whether she vanished quietly or got dragged into the light. The headline hit the screens like a final punch. Not Derek's name, he was already finished. Not Karen's, she had retreated into silence. The name flashing everywhere was the one Derek once treated like dirt. Heavily pregnant woman slapped and publicly dumped, becomes sole heir to 10 billion Foster Global Trust, fraud probe targets executive boss. Underneath, Lillian Foster. A photo followed Lillian leaving the courthouse weeks earlier, chin lifted, one hand resting over her stomach, Sandra Newman at her side like a shield. People online zoomed in on the faint bruise, on the way she kept walking anyway. Comment sections filled with words that used to belong to other people, not to her. Heir, trust, fraud investigation, trillion-dollar structures. Lillian saw none of it in real time. She was in a quiet hospital room, lights dim, holding two newborn babies against her chest. The twins were small, warm, and real in a way money could never be. One of them curled a tiny fist around her finger like a promise. For a moment, the world outside didn't matter. Then her phone buzzed softly on the bedside table. Sandra's name appeared. Lillian didn't panic. Panic belonged to the old life, the one where Derek controlled the story. She answered slowly, voice soft so she wouldn't wake the babies. Sandra sounded calm but satisfied. It's done, she said. The final family court orders came through. You have sole legal authority for now. Protective measures stay in place. And Mr. Swanson's team just confirmed the transfers. They've completed the estate process. The trust distributions are now legally locked under your sole control. Locked. That word mattered, because it meant Derek couldn't claw at her future anymore. No matter how hungry he was, it meant Karen couldn't whisper her way into control. It meant Marissa couldn't use procedure and concern as weapons again. Lillian's eyes closed briefly. She didn't feel joy the way people expected. She felt something quieter. Release. Like something heavy had finally been lifted off her ribs. She looked down at her babies and let herself breathe. You're safe, she thought. Not just to them, also to herself. Months later, Marissa Conway resurfaced alone. No Derek, no title, no protection. Her name appeared in corporate memos first, not gossip columns. Resignation accepted. Pending completion of internal review. Subject of ongoing investigation into misuse of position. Documents referred to regulators. The same systems she once used to destroy. Lillian's reputation turned cold and sharp against her. Company compliance officers, who used to defer to her, now interviewed her with recorders running. External regulators matched the trust's footage and Renee's forensic reports with internal audit logs. The burned letter was ash, but the act of burning it wasn't not when video, delivery records, and email trails existed. Marissa did what opportunists always did when the ground cracked. She ran, not with a dramatic suitcase in the night, with lawyers, with carefully worded statements, with stepping away for personal reasons. She tried to slip away wearing a different name, a different brand, but evidence didn't care about branding. Antonio's footage didn't disappear because she deleted her social media. Renee's financial trail didn't evaporate because she changed her phone number. The emails, those polished, cruel instructions, had been preserved on servers she couldn't control. Peers who once smiled at her stopped taking her calls. Doors that opened easily before stayed shut. The silence around her became the loudest punishment. And somewhere in that silence, Marissa finally understood what Lillian had learned earlier. Power built on cruelty always expires. Lillian didn't post long threads online. She didn't subtweet. She didn't share screenshots. She didn't need to. When she finally stepped before cameras, it wasn't for drama. It was for closure. She stood with Sandra beside her and spoke clearly, slowly, so no one could twist her words. "This isn't revenge," Lillian said. "It's truth." Her voice didn't shake. "The truth protects my children," she continued. "And it protects other women who are told to stay quiet when they're being harmed. If you're watching this and you think staying silent makes you loyal, it doesn't. It makes other people comfortable. People listen, not just because she was rich now, but because she was real. Because they'd seen the video of her being slapped while pregnant and the later footage of her walking into court with her head up." She finished simply, "I won't discuss details beyond what's in the public record. The courts have spoken. The trust has spoken. I'm going back to my life." Then she stepped away from the microphones. No threats, no insults, no messy speeches, just a woman walking back to her life. Lillian sat by a sunlit window months later, holding her twins in her arms. They'd grown. One grabbed at her necklace chain, the other slept with their tiny mouth open. The house around her was different from Derek's old house. Not louder, not more glamorous, just hers, secure, quiet. Papers with trust seals and investment summaries lay neatly in a drawer, not on the table. She didn't have to flaunt any of it. She didn't look hidden anymore. She didn't look small, not silent, not erased, unshaken. And somewhere far away, a man who once called her nothing sat in the echo of his own choices, realizing the worst kind of karma wasn't losing money. He had remarried fast, chasing status in a new ring and a new wife. But even that second marriage couldn't protect him from the fallout of what he'd done. It was losing access to a woman who would have loved him honestly. Even after the cameras moved on, the truth stayed waiting quietly for the next person who thought loyalty was weakness. "I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it," the narrator voice returns. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.
Welcome to the Story Channel. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few notes. The content in this video uses AI-generated images and voice narration, combined with the channel's creative editing. Everything is intended solely for entertainment purposes and does not depict or reflect any real events or real people. Hope you enjoy the story and have a great time watching.